And we're back. Another episode, finally. I've been busy the last week. Um, we're out of rockets. We're going to make more rockets. Yeah, I've been busy. I've had summer classes going on. Um, what else? I guess not much. Shelter in place is still kind of going. California just enacted. Governor Newsom signed into law something saying that it's mandatory now for us to be wearing masks in public, which is nice because it comes at the same time that the health officials in my county have decided that we're going to start opening all the stores back up. And the sheer amount of people who don't want to wear masks is just absolutely astounding. You know, I think it was Joe Rogan on his podcast, and I don't make it a point to watch Joe Rogan because I don't think he's a particularly insightful guy to watch or listen to. But he had Bill Burr, the comedian, on, who is also someone I don't particularly follow, but who made a good point to Joe Rogan, because Joe Rogan's been spending this entire thing bitching about, when he wants to get back outside and wants to do stuff, and that he thinks they shouldn't end the quarantine or shouldn't wear masks or whatever like that. And Bill Burr called him out on that, saying, hey, you don't have a medical degree, so I'm not going to sit here and pontificate with you when neither of us have a medical degree talking about what we think is right. We'll leave that to the experts. Which I don't think it's wrong to pontificate on those sort of things. You just need to explain to your audience that you have no idea what the hell you're talking about, and you're talking at your ass if you're Joe Rogan. Which sort of brings back to the last time I did one of these podcasty episodes and talked about the intellectual dark web, because in all fairness, Joe Rogan kind of is part of that. In that, he's espousing some ideas as if he thinks they're pretty good, but as if he thinks, that's what we should be doing. But at the same time, he also does this thing where he changes his viewpoint to fit, whatever his guest's viewpoint is, which is, I think, the wrong way to take doing a podcast, especially if you're going to have people like Alex Jones on. You got to take a stand at some point and show people what your belief system is. And from what Joe Rogan's shown us, his belief system's not particularly great. Sorry about that. My dog is a needy bitch. So anyway, yeah. So Joe Rogan does that thing where he just refers himself in his belief system to whatever his guest is doing, and that's just it's not a good way to do a podcast if you're going to have people on with pretty controversial views that you don't necessarily want to give credence to. I think it's too much of an easy thing for somebody like Alex Jones to capitalize on that and say some pretty harmful things that people are going to come out of there thinking that, at the very least, Joe Rogan tolerates, if not endorses. I think the only time I've actually watched Joe Rogan is when he had Bernie Sanders on, because I wanted to hear someone talk about politics with Joe Rogan who actually knew what the fuck he was talking about, because Joe Rogan clearly doesn't. Um, so I'm glad somebody called him out on that, because it's dangerous talk. Um, as someone who has an immensely successful podcast, to me it feels like he has the responsibility not to be a jackass about some of these sort of things. Um, and maybe that's his whole shtick, because I know he's supposedly a stand-up comedian, although I've never heard anything funny come out of his mouth. Um, that's the forward key. Um, but I can't stand to hear talk like that. It's infuriating. Um, as someone who lives with his at risk nearly father, in terms of the age category and everything like that, and health problems, it's not nice to see. Oh, we need a custom head, is what we need. It's not nice to see Joe Rogan um, talking about stuff to such a wide range of an audience, when he clearly, doesn't actually know what he's talking about, and can't actually articulate why he feels that way without saying, well, he doesn't want to wear a mask just because he doesn't want to wear a mask. Think if we do item frames on that, will those look more like doors and put little handles on them? Oh, that's a painting. Okay, we're going back to base. Where am I? Oh God, there we are. Say it's time at which my blindness finally confronts me in this game, causes me to not actually be able to do this with any and all efficiency, at the very least. Bob Dylan's new album came out yesterday. I heard it. Well, I technically heard it 2 days ago, in the evening. Just about. It was on BB6 Radio, the debut, right at midnight GMT, which was about 4 or 5 o'clock PM here. And it was pretty okay. Um, as someone who's been an avid Bob Dylan fan for quite a while, it's cool to be around at the release, because it's the first time in 8 years he's released an album of new original material, and it's also the first time since I've become a fan of Bob Dylan that he's done that. So that's really exciting. However, some of it just kind of falls flat. Like some of the there's one fantastic song right towards the end of the album called Key West, and it's like instant classic, fantastic. It's like, I like to think of it as an analog to Bob Dylan wrote a song in the 1970s called Forever Young, which became relatively popular. And I like to think of Key West as sort of an analogous Forever Old, if you will. But yes, some of Dylan's album just doesn't stack. I do like a majority of the album. I think overall it's a fantastic album. I don't think specifically, because it had 3 singles that came out beforehand, and I didn't even bring my diamonds over here. I hope I have some in my under chest. Nope. I don't think that the first single off the album, Murder Most Foul, I don't think it got. I think it got more recognition than it honestly deserved. Obviously, it's a very powerful piece, very long and epic piece about the death of JFK for the first 9 minutes, and the the aftermath is, the other 8 minutes is basically Dylan talking about the kind of music he likes to listen to, which I guess is not, too far off from what the point of this this Minecraft Let's Play has been so far, is to talk about, your own personal take on historical events and then the type of music you listen to. I've done basically both of those things in much longer and drawn out and assuredly less musically talented formats as Dylan has in Murder Most Foul. But people laud in Murder Most Foul as if it was the end-all be-all of songs about that sort of stuff. And, I mean, for all intents and purposes, I mean, if you're going to talk about a poetic song about the JFK assassination, first of all, it's not even the best one that Dylan himself has done. That's obviously Chimes of Freedom. But if you're talking about poetic referrals to the assassination of JFK and what it means for the country, I'd have to refer you back to Dylan's old quasi-archenemy Phil Oakes. His song Crucifixion, which came out in 1966, is a much better long-form musical ballad about the assassination and its effects on the American public. And if you want to talk about, some of the best long epic songs about music, popular music, and their here we go. What's the price on this? $1 for one head. If you want to talk about music and its effect on the nation as a whole and the public consciousness, there's really none better song than Don McLean's American Pie. So for that matter, Murder Most Foul to me seems like Dylan not necessarily riding on the coattails, but creating his own Crucifixion and then American Pie and mashing it up in one song and then people calling it genius. It's not the first thing to do that. It hasn't innovated anything. And I think it seems a little disingenuous for people not to talk about those things. And I know Phil Oakes is not very much is not, someone in the public consciousness. I know he's a very obscure singer-songwriter for the public eye, considering, he's been dead since the 70s. But he was a contemporary of Dylan, and Dylan actually did like him for a bit until he decided he didn't like him. And that was that with Phil Oakes. Phil Oakes sort of, he didn't fall into obscurity because he was always, kind of obscure, but Phil Oakes was in a situation where, he got majorly depressed and eventually he did kill himself. And whether that was, because of lack of satisfaction or because, he didn't have a friend in Dylan or anything like that. Obviously, Phil Oakes like Dylan, and you can see there's a lot of one-sided interplay in a lot of what Phil Oakes talked about with Dylan, but Dylan sort of, at some point, decided to pay him no mind anymore. And I think the point at that, the story that they always tell, is that in 1965, Dylan released, I think it's November, December of 1965, Dylan released a single called Can You Please Crawl Out Your Window? And he was riding in a car with Phil Oakes, and it came on the radio, and Phil Oakes said, well, it's too obscure. I don't think people are going to know what you're talking about in this. And Dylan threw him out of the car saying, you're not a politician, or you're not a musician, you're a journalist or something like that, because Phil Oakes was kind of the guy who wrote mostly topical political songs. He was a big political activist and everything, which is something that Dylan famously started to shy away from by that time. So, in essence, Murder Most Foul doesn't seem to me to be anything that's particularly innovative, and I don't think it deserves the recognition it has gotten so far. That doesn't make it a bad song. It just means it's, less of a good song than it should be. I think, something, and part of it is the fact that, it got released as a single. It was the first Dylan original song in 8 years and everything like that. And it's been out for whatever it's been, 2 months now before the album came out. But there's other songs on the album that certainly deserve more recognition, not the least of which was the second single that came out, which was "I Contain Multitudes," which, of course, is an obvious Walt Whitman reference. But on top of that is, it's a good song with a lot of like classic Dylan interplay in the lyrics. He's Bob Dylan is quite the wordsmith, and that doesn't show too much in "Murder Most Foul." It just seems relatively kind of lazy. Some of the rhymes that he used, like you expect more from him, but oh God, no! Dylan, we gotta love Dylan. No one can speak ill of Dylan. And it hurts. Well, it doesn't hurt to say that coming from someone who's been a longtime fan of Dylan. But it's just sort of that thing that at some point you get to a point where there are artists who have been well established, who no longer, they're no longer judged harshly on their stuff. Personally, like my belief in terms of, what's the gold standard for an established singer-songwriter who's considered one of the classic greats to release an album in old age, in terms of originality and innovating their sound, is "You Want It Darker" by Leonard Cohen, which came out, weeks before he died in 2016. Everything lit up in here on the bottom floor? I think so. Yeah, it looks like it. It's a fantastic album overall, and it's different to what he usually does with his sound, but not overtly so that it screws. And then the not overtly so that it it turns you off from it. And then on top of that, it's fantastic lyrically. There's a lot of lyrics in that album that are fantastic. They're saying, oh well, Leonard Cohen, he's still got it in terms of it. And then it was a shock for me because when I heard that album, that was the first outside of like Hallelujah. Or maybe Suzanne or Goodbye Marianne or Bird on the Wire, his more famous works. One of the first things that I actually heard from Leonard Cohen when that happened, when that album came out, I was in college, and I read a review of that, and it had a link to the YouTube page of like his topic channel or something, where it had one of his songs. And the song or the video that was embedded in the review was the song "On the Level," which I immediately fell in love with, and I thought it was a great song. I thought it was a good way for an artist to use his, croaky, raspy, old, growling voice, in a way that shows that you understand where your level of singing is, especially for someone who is not particularly famous for their singing, a la Leonard Cohen or Bob Dylan, for that matter. And so after hearing that album, I really liked it, and I really liked the feel that you got from it. So I went and I listened to all of his stuff, after that point, and then when it came out a few weeks later that he died, it crushed me. It's like, I couldn't believe it. It was, it was a sad time. Thought I had beehives over here. Oh well. We'll go get more. Because I know I have some. So, in terms of Dylan's album, I don't know if it exactly... I'd have to listen to it. I've only listened to it through about twice since hearing it on the radio 2 days ago. But, it's something I'm going to have to listen to through a couple more times to understand whether it actually is going to have the sticking power of the other albums we consider greats, or in terms of, the gold standard, you want it darker for aging artists, as I talked about before. We'll have to see if it lives up to that gold standard that I've established. Because, right now I'm not entirely certain that it does. Yeah, it works okay. One more thing necessary. A sign. Make it look a little more like a drawer. Yeah, kind of.